It's Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. We're speaking to you live from a black hole, I think. We don't have our live cam working this morning. We have two new people in the controls, so bear with us today. It may be a bumpy ride, kind of like what Canada's in right now, a bumpy ride. We've got a lot to talk about. BC budget by the numbers, the trade war, Doug Ford ready to turn out the lights. And there may be a reason to hope on the trade war, though, too. Trump and Trudeau to talk today. And Ford says, stop the booing. All that and more on the Really Big Show. With me, Ian Burns, all the way from Ottawa in the snowbank. And you can't see from this black background here. We're in a cardboard box, I think, but Kelowna is in a beautiful sunny day. How's it looking in Ottawa, Ian?
It's grey and miserable and snowy. But I think the black background is appropriate, isn't it, really? Because we're all in mourning now since we're at war with our erstwhile friends to the south.
Day 2 of the war. There you go. We'll start with BC, though. The BC releases its budget, and it's by the numbers here. $10.9 billion estimated 2025-26 deficit, up from $9.1 billion in 24-25. $20 billion estimated 25-26 capital spending, up from $16 billion. A lot of ups there. And 1.8% is the real GDP growth that they're expecting in 2025. That's up from 1.2 last year, still really low. And the good news, I guess, is you're going to get $110 back from ICBC. And $43 billion projected cumulative GDP losses by 2029 if these U.S. tariffs hold. And that would mean 45,000 job losses by 2029 under the tariffs, and a 6.7% projected unemployment in 2026 if the tariffs stick, and $1.7 billion to $3.4 billion potential annual revenue losses under the tariffs.
I would take all of that with a gigantic pinch of salt, to be honest. I don't think that really corresponds to much at all. I think they've just basically made that up, haven't they? They don't really know what the effect's going to be, because nobody knows. But the one thing that they do know, or sort of one thing that they can control, is related to economic incentives and taxes and things like that. And on that front, they got a very negative reception from the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, BC Chamber of Commerce, and lots of other groups. They all said it was inadequate, really. Even the Greens, their best friends, said that it was a standstill budget. So it hasn't gone down too well.
Yeah, and then Trudeau coming out and saying that the U.S. is out to destroy us. And he said this is a Holly Doan Blacklock story. And he just said, I don't know if negotiations will be any of use. He told reporters his goal is to destroy the Canadian continent so he can try and annex this country. That seems to be what he wants. I don't know. Trudeau said he has not spoken to the president since February. And he also went on to his usual stuff and said we'll never be the 51st state. And that a continental trade war will be devastating, said Trudeau. And our government needs to make sure we are trying to make sure nobody goes hungry and everybody else carries their share of this. So, yeah, there you go. I don't think we're live on TikTok, but we are live on YouTube right now. So we have one of the lives running. Again, as I said, it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride here today. So, Doug Ford says he's going to turn the lights off. On Ontario Premier said yesterday, you can turn that slide there. There you go. He said he'll shut down the hydroelectricity exports to America if the U.S. piles on more tariffs. Yeah, so this is another Holly Doan Blacklock story. So if you want to read the full story, you can go to Holly Doan's Blacklocks, and they have an annual subscription. It's well worth it. It says Trump, if they follow through with the tariffs, they'll immediately apply a 25% surcharge on electricity they export, and they said they will not hesitate to turn off the power. Ontario is America's largest English-speaking trading partner, according to the Federal Economic Development Agency for South Ontario. And angry for it, he said he's also ordered all American contractors struck from the Government of Ontario bidders list. Every year, the province and his agency spend about $30 billion in procurement, he said, and they canceled about $100 million Starlink contract. And it's done, it's gone, he said.
Captain Canada is not very happy, is he? He's sat there with his never on the back of his little jersey there. Never 51. Very clever, Doug. But yeah, I think it's very risky, isn't it? Talking about refusing them power, because quite a lot of oil and energy comes from the US border, doesn't it? Infamously, one of the stupidest things about
Yeah.
this country, the history of this country, is that all of the oil that comes from Alberta has to go through the US to get to the east. Just unfathomable levels of stupidity by the federal government and the provinces over the years. But that's the truth. So if he does do that and he punishes them and deprives them of energy, then they can deprive the whole of Eastern Canada, where most of the population lives, of
There,
oil. So that wouldn't work out very well, I don't think.
there's no winners in this tit for tat thing. 100% no winners. Mexico has taken a different policy or stance on this, and they said we're not going to do anything till Sunday to see how it plays out. And it sounds like there might be some relief today. We'll get to that. So Mexican president said, we've done all you asked for the border. What more can we do? So that's the Mexican president there saying that. She seems to have taken a more stable response to what most of the Canadian politicians are doing, taking, like this tit for tat thing, right? So, but it's hard to understand what Donald Trump will do next. So there you go.
I think that's why it is quite shrewd, actually, what Scheinbaum is doing, the Mexican president, because it's just like you kind of. I think the lesson that's been learned, even just the last month or so, last couple of months of his second term, the lesson that should have been learned by leaders is just stand back, let him do his angry chimpanzee jumping up and down on a desk routine. Just let him do that for a bit. Let him throw his, whatever it is that he wants to throw at you, and then see what happens. Give him a few days, let him sort of cool off. And I think that's what the Mexican president is doing. She's just like, all right, he's doing it again. So step back, let's close the door, let him do it, let him roll around, and then let's see what it looks like in a few days. I think that is actually shrewd. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and then one of the things, Doug Ford's saying they're going to cut off spending money with the Americans, and here are you actually are going to do this story. The Liberal Party, which says with Bill C-18 says that this is a while ago, said they won't spend money with Meta, have now not just spent that a couple $100,000. You say that number is now close to $1 million, and they continue to spend because they say they've got to get their election information out, and they use social media because they can't get news on Meta's platforms, Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, after having been told by Meta that that's what would happen if they put the Online News Act into force, which they then did. So then got news banned on Facebook, even though they were given ample warning that that's what was going to happen. They did it anyway. Then they said Meta and Mark Zuckerberg are threats to democracy. And then they broke their own boycott. I mean, that was kind of central to the whole moral position that they had was, we're not going to spend any money on Facebook because they're dangerous. And then CTV, I assume they got a tip probably from within the government itself. They did a story, very, very sort of short, brief story where they just said the federal government has broken the boycott and it's $100,000. And then they left that. The CTV obviously don't care because they get government funding, so they're not interested in this story particularly. But they just left it. And then I think it was 2 days later or something, I sent an email in and I just checked in. I was like, what's going on now, fellas at the federal government? And then it was nearly $300,000 by that point. So I've waited just under a month under the assumption that it'll be higher. And sure enough, yeah, it's over $1 million now. And I'm sure if I ask them in 2 months, it'll be 10 million or something like that. It's just it's the thin end of the wedge, as they say.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Canadian media outlets, independent media outlets, choked off, not allowed to put their information on Facebook or Instagram. And that has cut traffic in half for most media outlets across Canada and cut their revenue streams by about the same amount. Pierre Poilievre, another story by Holly Doan, says, let the MPs handle the backstabber. He wants Parliament recalled to deal with Donald Trump. And it makes sense to have that back in there. His message to the president is Canada will fight back and we will defend our people. Let's remember it's almost 100 days since we first heard from Donald Trump's threat. And what did the government do to make us more sovereign and independent? The doors are closed to Parliament for months now while the Liberals continue to fight for power. No legislation has been amended, no taxes reduced, no measures taken to free us from Donald Trump. Parliament currently is not due to open until March 24th, and that is the story that most media outlets are not picking up, and you'd think that would be the most important story right now. Our Parliament locked out while the Liberals follow through with their coronation.
Yeah, and it isn't just Polyev. We should stress Jagmeet Singh as well. I think that was yesterday, wasn't it? Came out, or might even have been Monday. Came out and said that Parliament should be back. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? And Anita Anand, who sort of manages trade for the federal government, she was interviewed today, and she was asked about interprovincial trade because, you know, she said it herself, but lots of people have made the point that, including Pierre Poilievre, that Canada would actually generate more revenue, more money by trading with itself than it's lost through this punishment by the Americans. So, you know, it's been put forward as a real no-brainer, and it should be done as soon as possible. And yet, well, Parliament isn't even open. So even if there is a plan, like an amendment to the bill or a new bill on interprovincial trade, that can't be looked at, can't be discussed, can't be submitted to be voted on. The committees can't look at it. You know, there's like a whole process to get a bill through. And also, she was asked in this interview with the CBC this morning, she was asked, much as we've discussed, which is kind of like, this has been a problem in Canada for decades. This goes back to the beginning of the country. You know, this is as old a problem as Canada has. And yet, where's the work? You know, where's the actual results? And she sort of stuttered and stumbled and had nothing at all to say, really. She just said, we're working on it, pretty much. So it seems to me like that's nowhere near being achieved.
And then we have this other story here that's really relevant to what's going on in Canada's real estate market too, just to show you the woes of Canada. Home sales in the Greater Toronto area fell by more than 1/4 in February compared with a year ago. The Toronto Real Estate Board said that 4,000 homes were sold last month. That's down 27% compared to 5,500 in February of 2024. So just showing you that, you know, like interest rates, obviously, it's still a huge problem in Canada too. But back to the trade stuff. Trudeau and Trump expected to speak today as the countries clash in that trade war. And then there's some stuff from Howard Lutnick. He's the U.S. Commerce Secretary. We got a few clips here to play here from Howard Lutnick.
He's going to come out today angry that Americans are still being killed. Now, both the Mexicans and the Canadians were on the phone with me all day today trying to show that they'll do better. And the president's listening because, you know, he's very, very fair and very reasonable. So I think he's going to work something out with them. It's not going to be a pause, none of that pause stuff. But I think he's going to figure out, you do more, and I'll meet you in the middle some way. And we're going to probably be announcing that tomorrow. So somewhere in the middle will likely be the outcome. The president moving with the Canadians and Mexicans, but not all the way.
Just to clarify.
And we have another clip here to play.
On your confirmation.
Thanks so much. And wasn't last night's speech amazing? I could have been more proud of President Trump.
We'll get into the niceties on that in just a moment. Let's kick it off, sir, with a question about your comments yesterday, when you suggested that maybe there could be a compromise on trade between the United States, Mexico and Canada, and maybe we'd hear more about that today. Has the president confirmed that? Is that still the plan?
Well, I think what happened is you have the trade ministers and all the people from Canada really working hard with our Homeland Security people. Remember, this is not a trade war. This is a drug war. We've got fentanyl still pouring into the country, and it's got to stop. So what's happened is they're showing us even more ways to try to stop the flow of fentanyl. And if they can stop the flow of fentanyl, the president is open-minded. There are going to be tariffs, let's be clear. But what he's thinking about is which sections of the market that can maybe he'll consider giving them relief until we get to, of course, April 2nd. But I don't want anybody to forget, April 2nd is the day that we announce our reciprocal tariffs around the world. And so April 2nd is coming, but this is about fentanyl this month.
Got that. Just want additional clarity. Just to be very clear on this. Yesterday when you said, I think the president's going to figure out, you do more and I'll meet you in the middle, we're probably going to announce that tomorrow, as in today. Can we no longer expect that announcement?
No, I didn't say that. I said the president is listening to the offers from Mexico and Canada. He's thinking about trying to do something in the middle. He's thinking about it. We're talking about it. We're going to, when I leave here, I'm going to go talk about it with him. And I think early this afternoon, we expect to make an announcement. And my thinking is it's going to be somewhere in the middle. So not 100% of all products.
And then one last clip from Howard Lutnick.
And not none.
I love when Trudeau, who's about to leave the government, and obviously he should leave the government with his kind of talking. You know, he's leaving the government. Hopefully they'll elect someone who's clever, who comes down and says to Donald Trump, we want to do business with you. We want to do business fairly, and we're going to get rid of all this nonsense. They got a digital tax in Canada. They try to tax our tech companies. What happened to USMCA? I tell you what happened to it. The Canadians like to cheat.
Oh, my goodness. So, April 2nd.
There you go. That's a lot of...
the government.
There we go. We're going to get rid of that in a second here. That's a lot of Howard Lutnick stuff there.
I mean, the man is just a hooligan, isn't he? He sounds like a sort of peripheral character in The Sopranos or something. I mean, and then he has the gall to say that the Canadian politicians have been speaking rudely. And then, like, almost his next breath, he says, the Canadians like to cheat. I mean, come on, be serious. But anyway, in the serious world, that's not his world because he isn't a serious person. But in the real world, the Dow Jones now is up 255 points. S&P is up, Nasdaq's up. So the people who actually, you know, do this sort of stuff for a living, they think that there is going to be a concession, clearly, don't they? And they're optimistic.
The market always speaks the truth, and that's what we know. The market is a forecaster, and the market looks like it believes that there will be some type of concession today. The one thing I want to make a comment on, the digital service tax, which has hurt media companies across Canada, and that's part of that Facebook Bill C-18 mess too. So that is, like a thing for sure. That, and then I would say to him when he says, like, they need to follow the USMCA. Just think if both sides follow the USMCA to the T, what a better place we would be in, right? Because we already have a trade agreement, right?
Well, we did have one. I don't think it really exists anymore, does it, since the Americans have unilaterally cut it to shreds? But yeah, I mean, it would be nice if that actually existed, wouldn't it?
And then we have our friend Francois-Philippe Champagne would have said that the feds are working to prevent predatory takeovers of Canadian companies during this trade war. And that's been going on forever, not just U.S. companies taking over Canadian companies. We're seeing this with China and all kinds of things. But, like a lot of Canadian companies voluntarily moved to the U.S., including Brookfield Asset Management's Mark Carney's, where he used to chair. They moved there voluntarily, and then the takeovers come too, is because Canadians are scared to invest capital because, to invest capital, it requires certainty and favorable regulations in that. And right now, it's not very favorable in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument. I mean, it's also true of lots of the noises that we've been hearing over the last 6 weeks or whatever. You could argue that we should have been hearing that for years, shouldn't we? And this is one area. Like a lot of the Canadian crown jewels end up being bought out by foreigners, or like you say, gone down to America. And it's for a lot of reasons. But I mean, the reason that Mark Carney's old company, Brookfield, the reason they went to New York, or how they tried to justify it, was that they needed access to all that delicious American capital. And that is like a massive advantage that the Americans have. They just have like a super abundance of capital. Whereas in Canada, most of the capital is in houses, isn't it? That's where people put their capital. That's where people invest. This is not as strong an investment society.
Yeah. So I would like it if people understand hockey. A hockey analogy for most Canadians is something that people can really understand. And if we think about the Liberal government as the management team, so we got Justin Trudeau as the GM, we got Chrystia Freeland as the head coach on the bench, and then the rest of the people playing assistant coaches and management of the team and stuff like that. What we've had over the past few years is we're putting a minor league team or even a midget hockey team on the ice that, like is a developing team though, for sure, because it's like, the green energy stuff and that. So we're putting those players on the ice, they can grow into greatness maybe at one point. In the meantime, we've benched our players. We benched Wayne Gretzky and Bobby Orr and all these other players, which is Alberta Oil and Saskatchewan Resources, all that stuff. Those players have been sitting on the bench and won't be let out the gate because we won't put our goal scorers on the ice. And that's Canada's strength. And right now, for the past 10 years, we won't let them out the gate.
I appreciate that analogy, yeah. LNG, our star player, LNG, just sat there in tears, can't get on the ice. God bless him.
Yeah. So there you have Wayne Gretzky. Let's just put a line on Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and I don't know who you put on the wing with them, but Josh is back there. Maybe he's got a person they wants to put on the Gordie Howe. Maybe we put on his wing, and we got Paul Coffey and Raymond Bourque on the defense, and Kenny Dryden in net. And those players aren't allowed on the ice, right? Because for some reason, like, you have a Karina Gold that says they don't want them on there. They say that we need to cut off Alberta's access to put their energy out to our seaports.
You're aging yourself with that lineup.
I know my lineup is old, Josh, as he's going to want to put Connor McDavid out there. But we're not putting any of these players out there. We're putting out, these midget players. Maybe it's because it's their kids. Obviously, it is their kids. Stephen Jabot has decided who the lineup is, with solar farms and that kind of stuff, whereas our star players are left on the bench.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not a bad analogy. It's a funny one, but I don't think it's too bad. Yeah, I mean, Canada hasn't, in general, economically speaking, Canada hasn't exactly been leading with its strongest players, has it? And because it's almost like, we've got all these people, Wayne Gretzky, Connor McDavid, et al. We've got them, but we're like embarrassed about them. It's almost like, they've put out some obnoxious tweets in 2013, and we're really embarrassed. So we want to get rid of them.
Yeah, we're ashamed of those players for some reason, and they've been basically benched. And we're actually going to put a story together on that. We'll give it the old hockey analogy. But let's move on here before we get too caught up in that. And if you want to comment, you can put your best players on the ice. We'll see who that is. The U.S. cuts off intelligence with Ukraine. That's another, like Donald Trump sticking his paw into it and causing a lot of turmoil in the world. The Europeans and the Ukrainians obviously freaking out on that because the U.S., again, is the strongest military might in the world.
It's also really awkward because obviously the US they've got like more than a dozen intelligence agencies. I can't remember the actual number. Like every sort of like department in the US seems to have its own intelligence agency for some mysterious reason. So obviously they are the biggest player in that world, but they also have the Five Eyes thing, which includes Canada and Britain and Australia and New Zealand. And as far as I'm aware, they're all still giving intelligence to the Ukrainians. So that's a bit awkward, isn't it? Because it's like that's supposed to be a team. But it just kind of highlights like how different the US is behaving. Like they've really gone off on their own path under Trump, and that's the least of it, really. They've also stopped military aid, obviously, that's probably even bigger, I would say, than the intelligence thing.
Yeah, and then Canada's enemies are looking at the vulnerable Arctic. You and I have talked about this quite a bit as an attractive location. Again, Russia's on the other side of that border, and the Chinese there too. And when with climate change and as the Arctic opens up, it would become the most economic passageway in the world. The importance of it would be far bigger than Panama and the Suez Canal if there is an Arctic passageway that's opened up because of the shortness of that pathway.
Yeah, but also those two, they're not ideal, really, are they? Like canals aren't perfect. If you just watch, or you just like look at images, even just look at pictures of the Suez Canal. It's like it's pretty narrow, big queues, big lineups, and obviously, as happened a few years ago, if a ship crashes or something like that, goes aground, then the whole thing's finished. You have to it can be weeks before it reopens. So obviously, in that sense, the Northwest Passage would be amazing, wouldn't it? But what CSIS are saying here is, again, something that's pretty obvious and something that people are aware of up there in the north, or people who watch the north, is that foreign companies, often state-backed, in the case of like China, for example, they're going in there and they're buying up mining projects and so on. They're sort of building up their footprint already, and they're sending ships there, and they're kind of, they're testing the waters quite literally up there. And you have to wonder, don't you, kind of what, let's say China, just as an example, if China landed on Baffin Island or something where nobody lives, like a part of Baffin Island where nobody lives, and just started to like mine something, and let's imagine in this world that the Americans don't feel like being very friendly to us, what could we actually do? What would actually be our response to that? It's not like we can take them on militarily. I mean, this is like, to call it like a vulnerability or a weakness, I think underplays it a little bit. It's kind of like we've gone into a boxing match with our hands tied behind our backs, where we are absolutely feeble when it comes to the Arctic, and it would require, decades of work, I think, to change that fact.
And the Russians are very active in the Arctic, and they even have a huge gas base up there, and military bases, and they have nuclear icebreakers and nuclear subs that are up there all the time. We have none of those. And so we rely on our American friends. And right now, if we're trying, like this is where this is so important, that we find a way to work with the Americans, because they're our only hope for strength. Because I don't like how long it would take us to build a nuclear sub or a nuclear icebreaker. I don't know where that would fit in our budgeting.
But I mean, it's also with the Americans. You say like we need to keep them as our friends, but also with all this talk of sovereignty and annexation and so on. Imagine if you replace what I said earlier, replace China with America. Imagine if the Americans identified a gigantic mineral deposit somewhere in the far north of Canada. We didn't exploit it for whatever reason and said that we weren't going to exploit it. And then the Americans are up there. They know the Russians are around. They know the Chinese are around. Are they going to just sit on their hands and let that happen? I mean, I think there's a realistic possibility that they would just go and mine it unilaterally and say, just like they're saying with Greenland, like, we're doing this for the free world. Like, you should say thank you, if anything. And in that sort of scenario, where's Canada's sovereignty? Like, what's Jagmeet Singh going to do then? Is he going to put his armor on and charge on a horse at the US Marines? It's like we are completely defenseless is basically the point. And Arctic sovereignty is a figment of our imagination, really.
And
You have to have sovereignty, you have to prove it, you have to have something to back it up.
Let's remind the viewers that Canadians' military numbers are 55,000, and our full complement is 77,000, still small. And we just recently, we didn't even give our soldiers decent sleeping bags. You could have got better sleeping bags for the cold from Canadian Tire. And that's embarrassing in itself. We've ignored our military for so long. And it's because we obviously rest under the comfort of the umbrella of the American military might. So that is a thing. And last night, I don't know if you watched, I think you did, you watched Trump's address to Congress there. One of the things that he kind of changes his tune a little bit there is, instead of like taking Greenland by force, is what some people have said that he's going to do, he's now saying to Greenland, how about coming over? Like, you guys get to make a decision. If you want to become whatever a part of America, we welcome you, because he does say Greenland is an important military base, and I think they recognize how important the Arctic is as a military stronghold, and I think more and more eyes are on it. The Russians have been definitely working on that, and then if you look at a map and you can see how much of Russia borders the Arctic, and Canada, we're on the opposite side of that. So it's Canada and Russia, really. The longest unprotected border in the world is between those two nations.
Yeah, but with Greenland as well, I think part of the reason maybe that he's being so noisy about that is because if we are entering this new world where, what does Justin Trudeau always call it, the international rules-based order, if we are actually moving past that, and I think that's already happened as far as I can see. But if that is the future, then the likes of Greenland are up for grabs. They really are. They're there for the taking. So maybe that's the context in which you have to consider Trump making this noise. It's almost like he's claimed Canada and he's claimed Greenland. So he's telling the other big boys, Russia and China, whoever, I mean, they're just those two really. He's saying, like, keep off. That's ours. So in a way, it's like that's attaching the American, the threat of the American military to those two areas, to like northern Canada and Greenland. But I mean, it is a bit of an anomaly, isn't it, Greenland? But there's this idea. I keep reading stories about it. I keep hearing like politicians in Europe and Canada, and obviously Denmark. They keep saying all this stuff about Greenland, how it's like you'll never have it and all the rest of it. It's like, come on. If America wants Greenland, Greenland will belong to America. That's just, you might as well acknowledge the reality and the truth. It's no good deluding yourself about it. There's only 50,000 people live in Greenland. I mean, it's not exactly going to be a difficult one to acquire, is it?
One of the things that makes Kelowna Now different is we actually will converse with you, and we will not just talk at you, we'll talk with you. And then there's a comment here from Ellen on our feed here saying that, you know, my children will, I'll never encourage my children to join the Canadian Armed Forces. And she says they're asking for more than we can give. And I think she's referring to a comment by Justin Trudeau when the veteran asked for a better wheelchair, and he said that they didn't have any money for that, and that you're asking for more than we can give. And I think that's how our military has been treated shamefully by this current government for so long. And Harper had started some stuff up in the north there, and then it got ignored, and we basically have been ignoring our north, our largest unprotected border for way, way too long. But let's move on. And then this is an article out of the BBC saying that maybe Canada joins the EU. BBC thinks that it doesn't seem quite as far-fetched as a new rally. And I think that might be the trump card that Canada could play. They could say to the Americans, hey, if you don't want us to be part of the USMCA, why don't we join the European Union? And that, I think, would get the Americans' attention.
Yeah. Probably not in a good way. I think they would be they'd be furious about that. But I mean, it's a funny one that the BBC, when they wrote this, they said, like, you know, they were very doubtful because it obviously would be an extraordinary thing to occur. But basically, their point was the world has turned upside down since Trump was elected or inaugurated. And therefore, it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if that happened. And I suppose it does make sense in some ways. But the only thing that I would say is you have to remember that Canada has a free trade agreement with the EU already, and hasn't really used it very much, to be honest. It hasn't really taken advantage of that. Hence, we're in this horrible position now because we're so dependent on the US. And it just, I mean, our trade relationship with the EU might have been a little bit better had we taken advantage of that trade deal by selling the Germans LNG, which they begged us for a few years ago. But obviously there was no business case from that, as our economic guru Justin Trudeau says. But it's the Americans might see it as a bluff, basically, is what I'm saying, because we've got a free trade agreement with the European Union, and we don't even really use it now. So why would we join the EU?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of comments coming on that too, and I say that just because, like, you know, the EU definitely has a lot more problems than even Canada has, and but I just think the Americans wouldn't like it, and I don't think it would be good for Canada or for the Americans if we join the EU. We even see that with you know, the United Kingdom leaving the EU with Brexit, right? So I don't think it's a viable thing, but it might be a viable threat. And if Donald Trump's watching, I guess he might know that now we're saying that's a viable threat, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are a few things that Canada could have tried. I mean, I think probably the most extreme threat so far has to be Doug Ford talking about cutting the electricity. That is that's on the extreme side. But there are other things, like we discussed right at the beginning of this nonsense that Trump started. Things like NORAD. You know, the Americans would be defenestrating themselves en masse if we said even the slightest thing about NORAD, like, and our commitment to it. That would terrify them to to their bones. So that would also be another kind of nuclear option. But I just feel with the EU, I see what you're saying. It would spook them. It would be a good idea, but I think they would probably call our bluff on that one, because the EU is hardly up to much and hasn't been for the last sort of 20 years.
Let's move on to the Liberal leadership race. Mark Carney sent me an email this morning. He's still not capitalizing my first name there, but Jim Dash, with just 5 days left in his campaign, the gravity of the current crisis sinking in. It's time for us to go all in on Mark Carney as he goes all in for you. So I'm not sure if it's Mark Carney talking or him talking in third person like a Seinfeld episode. But anyway, he says we're entering the final stretch, and Mark is ready to deliver the change and serious economic leadership that Canada needs to protect workers. So if we go back to our hockey analogy, it's basically saying they're going to change the GM, but keep all the same other management staff, keep the same player personnel on the ice, don't change the people on the ice, because we're still not going to let Alberta and Saskatchewan out of the gate, and that'll be a big change for Canada. Don't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also appalled by his misuse of hyphens there on coast to coast to coast. You need to reply to him and say you don't need hyphens there, Mark, my man. But then he's still trying to figure out how many semiconductors Canada sells to America, isn't he? So I think he's probably a bit too busy right now for that.
Grammar, and they don't answer. I've tried with Chrystia Freeland's when she sent me one, and it says, reach out to Chrystia if you have any questions. And I reached out to the text number, and I reached out to the email address that was provided, and they all bounced back. So they like to talk at you, not talk with you. So there you go. Like I said, this is what makes Kelowna now different. We're willing to talk with you and have a conversation as opposed to talk at you. Anyway, we had a clip here from Chrystia Freeland. Here, let's play this clip.
I intend to win on Sunday, and when I win, I will invite Mark to serve as finance minister in my government. I think we'll make a great team. I think right now we need a prime minister who has a seat in the House of Commons, who can lead a government that has the political legitimacy to fight this tariff war, and someone who has experience as a political decision maker in a crisis, someone who has the experience and the plan and the guts to stand up for Canada in this critical moment. That is, I am the leader who is uniquely qualified to fight for us right now. When I stepped down from the government on December 16th, in my resignation letter, I explained that the threat from Donald Trump was existential, that we needed to focus all of our attention on that threat, that we could not afford to spend money on anything else. I have sadly been proven right, and I also committed to my constituents, to all Liberals and to all Canadians, that come what may, I'll run in the next election. Thank you.
There you go. She even says that she'd take Mark Carney as her finance minister. How how really generous of her to say that. She's the same lady that says for the past 10 years, the Liberal Party has been really run by somebody that's been, their main focus has been virtue signaling and gender politics or identity politics. And here she is. Didn't have a voice then. She didn't fight Justin Trudeau on those things, but now she said she's ready to fight for you.
She's got a big fighter's face, hasn't she? It's all in the eyebrows with Chrystia Freeland. She gets very active in that eyebrow region when she's trying to show you how angry she is and how she's going to get Trump. Very interesting performer. I would say though, the only comment I really have is her saying that about Carney. I think it's safe to infer that the opposite will also be true, that when Carney wins, there's no suggestion that anybody else is going to win. When he wins, he's going to give his good friend Chrystia Freeland probably the finance minister job or whatever job it is that she wants.
He is the godfather of her children, is he not?
He is indeed, and they both have English spouses, and I think... Did Chrystia Freeland also study? Yeah, she did, didn't she? I think she studied in England, or she certainly worked for the FT in London. So they've got their sinister links to England there.
And here's our last clip from you put this one, Mark Carney, saying that our economy is stronger than the American economy in the medium term. We're going to play this clip here, a small part of it.
We're strong. We are strong. And I would say as well, our economy is stronger than the American economy in the medium term. And we are going to be stronger than the American economy, particularly if the U.S. government continues to pursue these types of policies, because we are looking to expand our trading relationships. We do have opportunities to build this economy. We do have a better balance sheet than the United States. We do have a people who are united and determined to move forward. And that's one, I really want to emphasize this. The question was asked about travel schedule moving around the country. What I'm finding on the ground across Canada is Canadians are determined, they're united, they have resolve, they want positive change, they want to move forward, and that's what we're offering to them. Thank you.
Yeah, so there you go. I think maybe he's been on a Joe Rogan podcast at around the 4:20 hour there, because I think sometimes some of the stuff that he says there may not make the most sense in the reality world.
I think we've heard Chrystia Freeland say this, haven't we, and Justin Trudeau, where they keep talking about the fundamentals. And I think he actually said it at another part of this question and answer period. I think he said something about debt to GDP ratio. It's like, why? I feel like saying to him, like, why are you still going on about that, Mark? Like, come on. That doesn't make Canada's economy stronger than America's. Like, you would think he'd be the guy that you would want to ask that question of, you know? You'd think he'd be the one that would know that. But instead, here he is saying that the Canadian economy is stronger than the American economy in the medium term, whatever that means. I mean, that's so vague and strange, a thing to attach to the end of that. But
and I would advise people to go on his website there, Mark Carney, and you look at it, and it still looks like he's going to bench our best players, and he's going to still focus on that the minor league team that he's going to put out there that may grow into that position in 10, 20 years, 30 years. But for the time being, our best and greatest will not be allowed on the ice, according to what I read, if you want to look at that hockey analogy.
Yeah, and you know, Canada's economy is like the money comes in, like the sort of the real deal, the big stuff comes in from energy. It comes in from oil, and it comes in from, you know, mining, things like that, primary resources basically. But then the rest of the economy is basically services, and there's a tiny little bit of manufacturing. But it seems like the Americans, they're going hard on manufacturing. I mean, that's what Trumpism's all about, really, isn't it? That's what MAGA is in many ways. It's to bring manufacturing back to the US. But there's no plan like that in Canada. So I just wonder, I mean, again, to go back to this stronger than the American economy in the medium term, I just think, but Canada doesn't have any manufacturing outside of, you know, there's some car makers in southern Ontario, but we don't have any manufacturing here. If we're going into this kind of strange, like almost like pre-First World War, or even earlier than that situation, where there's lots of isolated blocks and isolated economies, we don't have any manufacturing. So how could we be strong then, especially compared to the US?
Yeah, and if you look at it, here's Mark Carney saying that you know, the Canada's economy is stronger, yet he puts all his bets in America. He moved his company's headquarters to the United States. So he's like, if we go back to that hockey analogy, he's betting on the American team winning, and at the same time, he's insisting on putting out Canada's, like, you know, minor league team and benching our like strengths. And the other thing is that I don't know where I got lost in there somewhere, but it's just you say one thing and then do the other, right? Because where is the talk about getting our resources to market, as opposed to, you know, saying this about, you know, semiconductors and all these other things?
Yeah. Well, also, where are the like specific details? Where's the action? Let's not forget that Mark Carney is a member of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is in control of the executive. The Liberal Party is in power, is in government right now. And as far as anyone's aware, he is still the chief economic advisor to the Prime Minister. So where is the actual action on things like interprovincial trade, or making it easier to build infrastructure and and extract natural resources? Where is the actual material evidence? And the answer is nowhere to be seen.
There is that giant sucking sound, and that's capital fleeing Canada, and Mark Carney's company is part of that giant sucking sound. So no matter what he says they went to the U.S. to access capital, and that's where capital is going, to the United States. Deals are announced almost every day down there, and where is the deals being announced in Canada?
But that's also capital. There's a reason that they call our economic system capitalism. It's because capital is at the center of it all. That's the absolutely most fundamental asset in this system that we have. And Canada doesn't really have all that much capital outside of real estate, which, in economics is totally wasted money anyway. But the Americans have an abundance of it, which is one of the many reasons why their economy is so much stronger than ours, contrary to what Mark Carney might think.
Now we're getting to the end here. We have a really cool meme at the end here, so stick around for that. But we have one last, we have two more clips here to show you. One clip because Donald Trump addressed Congress last night, so we have a little clip of that.
The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
There you go. You watched that speech by Donald Trump, and there's one of the things is that they're claiming victory at their border, and they said that they have the record lowest number of people going through the border, and that is one of the talking points that the Biden administration had, that they needed legislation to close the border, but somehow the Trump administration has secured that border.
It's also a bit awkward for him though, because he promised the greatest deportation in history, and he did it again here actually, and he referred to Eisenhower, who previously held that record. Eisenhower deported hundreds of thousands. I think it might even have gone over 1 million people from the southern states, including American citizens, which is a bit of a funny one. But anyway, Eisenhower, he really, I think it was called Operation Wetback, hilariously, but he really followed through, Eisenhower, and he did a very serious deportation action, whereas Trump hasn't, and it doesn't look like he has actually any plans to do that either, because their deportations are actually lower than the Biden administration was achieving. That's why they've stopped. They used to have that number come up every day of we deported 600 people today. They're not doing that anymore because the numbers are so tiny. So now they've shifted over, or Trump has anyway, he's shifted it over now to say the fewest number of crossings. That's kind of, I mean, that's different to what he promised.
People used to want that coveted green card in the United States, and now he's selling a gold card. And he talked about that last night too, the coveted gold card, which fast tracks you into the United States and as a citizen. So
for $5 million. But I think the Americans, they've got a lot of visa schemes. I'm pretty sure they have an investment visa, which is about $1 million, or something like that. It's you invest a certain amount of money and you hire a certain amount of Americans. Yeah. And you're basically in, and that would cost less than $5 million. So I don't really understand that.
To be fair, many, many countries throughout the world have similar type ways to buy your citizenship into the country through investment, buying property, or buying a company. Many countries in the world have some type of way that you have to buy your way in. Here's our friend Doug Ford. Your friend, your next door neighbor, I think, right? Doug Ford has something to say.
And please don't take it out on the American people. And I ask you one more thing. Please do not boo the national anthem in Canada or in the US. These are soldiers that fought for our freedoms, our democracies, our sovereignty. They've laid their lives on the line. I had an opportunity to talk to General Romer the other day. What an American hero he is. He sent over a list of some of the items that I'm going to review. But my goodness, boo the referee, boo the players if you want. Do not boo the American national anthem. And to my American friends, do not boo the Canadian national anthem. That's crossing the line.
There you go. You can cut that off there. We're not Rebel News. That was just a clip there. I totally agree with that. Booing the national anthems is disrespectful for both nations that have fought so valiantly shoulder to shoulder with each other for the freedom of, that's too early for that slide there too. Yeah, any thoughts on Doug Ford there, Ian?
Melanie Jolie said the exact opposite in yet another interview with the British press. They've got great access to Canadian politicians. But last night on the BBC, she said, you know, we're really angry, we're really upset, and that's why we're booing the anthems. And Trudeau as well. I don't know if you watched his whole press conference, but he also said pretty much like the booing will probably continue. There will be booing.
Yeah, that's the Liberals love crisis and they love to drive a wedge, and they use a lot of that fear stuff, like, you know, Chrystia Freeland's favorite word there, existential always, right? Let's move on to markets though. Gold up this morning. Again, you know, like it's you know, hanging in that mark though, still needs to, looking to challenge 3,000. Bitcoin up and down, up and down, up and down. I can give you some analogies on Bitcoin. You can change that graph there. But Bitcoin is bumping around in that near that 100,000 mark, moving quite quickly. Right? Canadian dollar, you know, like it looks like it's coming up again because it doesn't believe or it thinks there might be a trade deal here, like where we actually get some relief on these trade things. We're going to see what happens today. And moving quite quickly in AI tech world, Sam Altman says ChatGPT is ready. The good news is that it's amazingly good and it's a thoughtful person to him. And the bad news, it's a giant expensive model. We really wanted to launch it to the Plus and Pro at the same time. But you know what their biggest problem is? They've run out of GPUs, and that's where NVIDIA comes into play. NVIDIA is the biggest supplier of those GPUs that everybody wants. But Sam Altman saying, heads up, this isn't a reasoning model and won't crush benchmark. It's a different kind of intelligence, and there's magic to it that I haven't felt before. He's really excited about it, to people to try that out there. And Wall Street, all in on adopting AI as well. Many financial institutions, including Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, all integrating AI into their enhanced productivity and innovate services. That this is going to happen so fast. I watched a piece on Optimus this morning, talking about how Optimus, which is a Tesla bot that's going to roll out, and how it'll have two really things. It'll have like two different parts of its memory. One, that it works with you, that it only remembers your stuff, but it also will be connected to the neural net. And just like the Borg, it will be drawing on the experiences from the whole collective. And if you want to understand how that works, go watch a Star Trek episode with the Borg, and then you'll probably start to understand what this Optimus is really going to be about.
And that's kind of, it makes Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter make a little bit more sense, doesn't it? Because he's really tapping into that for his Grok AI. He's really trying to get all of the Borg power from everybody on Twitter.
Yeah, you will be assimilated. There you go.
Absolutely.
In our EV section, we got a thing from BYD, one of China's biggest EV makers in China now. More EVs are sold than gasoline cars. I'll just play this little clip on BYD, but they raised almost $5.6 billion in share sale, the biggest such listing in Hong Kong in years, right? So this is just a small
EV
clip.
giant BYD said Tuesday it raised almost $5.6 billion in a share sale. That made it the biggest such listing in Hong Kong for 4 years. Now the Chinese firm plans to use the money to increase research and development spending and
We're almost coming to the end here. We got two more things to show you. And here's the meme from last night. That is the meme that we have here. Because the Democrats, it was almost like they were in an auction. It was, I don't know, I kind of laughed. I don't know what you said, but they had paddles there. And they would put them up every now and then whenever Trump said something, all these paddles would come out. It was just like a coordinated effort, right? And some of them, and it says that the reminder is offensive and possibly illegal to Photoshop anything on these Democratic sign that would make them look foolish. You don't have to. They've done that themselves. They've taken care of that for you. So yeah, so many. And I think they used the sergeant at arms to actually remove Al Green from, because he wouldn't stop shouting. They removed him from the House there.
I mean, it's the Democrats. It hasn't really been discussed very much, I don't think, since Trump was elected. But like, they are in disarray. They are just like, they are hopeless at the minute. It's actually a bad thing for and the Republicans should be concerned about it. I think it's a bad thing for America because it doesn't benefit the country to have a completely hapless opposition that does stupid things like this, and they just constantly make themselves look undignified and ridiculous. They should be really scrutinizing what Trump is doing, and they should be the opposition. That they need to be.
They should be having honest conversations as opposed to like this nonsense. I watched Bernie Sanders' face, and then one of the announcement that Donald Trump made last night, which I think would go great guns here in Canada: no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security. Imagine what that would do for our seniors if there's no tax on CPP and OAS, no tax on CPP and OAS, how that would go over so well in Canada. No tax on overtime, where somebody, if they want to work a little bit harder, a lot of people refuse overtime because they say it just costs too much in tax. And no tax on tips, how that would do for our server industry. Oh my God, that would be such a positive thing. But Bernie Sanders, you'd think, he's the guy that says he always fights for the working class. You'd think that he'd be jumping up and down applauding that, but no, he had a scowl on the whole time. They won't even stop to listen of what's going on. And Nancy Pelosi definitely, to be fairness, Donald Trump did attack the Democrats time and time again in his speech.
Yeah, he was really, really trolling them, and he even dropped his Pocahontas line when what's her name, Elizabeth Warren. She said something, and he just pointed to her, and he's like, "Oh, there's Pocahontas." It's like he is such a troll, and he was doing it from the very beginning. Really, he was just talking about how Biden was useless and all the rest of it. So he did goad them, but as you can see, but with those little paddles, they came prepared to be cringe. They were ready for the cringe.
Yeah, and I advise people to go find it, and I can't remember the guy's last name now, Joe, off like the CNBC's Money Show there. He did an interview with Elizabeth Warren. It's got to be one of the most hilarious interviews I've ever watched. Joe actually called her out on some of the stuff where she cherry-picked stats, and Joe was just having none of it, so it was pretty interesting. Yeah,
she's a bit of a crank, isn't she? I think the word crank was basically invented to describe people like that.
They're just disingenuous, and they pull out things that just you kind of lose faith in anything they say if they're just going to say crazy stuff. But you would think that the Democrats would have loved the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security benefits. We got the last thing to show you. Josh is getting tired. Going to sleep there, but this is going to make Josh happy. This is our good news segment. The golf courses are opening in Kelowna. March 14th, and this is one of the courses that's one of the slower ones to open. This is Gallagher's Pinnacle course, opens March 14th, and then the weather out there is amazing. And I imagine Josh will be doing a story shortly saying what all the course openings that are going to be happening here in Kelowna. And I imagine a few of them probably stayed open all year, did they?
I think Shadow was open a bit over the winter for sure.
So some places that you can golf all year round, some years in Kelowna, but I'm sure a lot of them, if Pinnacle's opening, I'm assuming many of them will be opening shortly. I think the big course at Gallagher's would take a little longer to open because of, it's their prime course, and it is one of the best courses in Kelowna. That's our show for today. Again, we talk with you, so we love your comments. We appreciate the comments, and we appreciate you as well. You can follow us on YouTube, and we'd appreciate it if you share that with other people so we can grow our audience on YouTube. Also on TikTok and on X, and I think we're live streaming to Facebook. Maybe not today because of Facebook and Instagram, but we're trying. And then we promise tomorrow we won't have this in deep space background here that we got going on, this black background, but. There you go. Maybe we did that, like Ian said, we did it because of the trade war. We're trying to show you where we're in solidarity. What? I don't know what I'm saying.
Well,
there you go.
Breaking news
no idea
just
what
came through.
I'm just rambling now.
Trump has spoken to Trudeau, so maybe we can remove it then.
What's happened?
Trump and Trudeau have conversed. So. No news about what they discussed, but this is the exact way it worked last time, didn't it? When there was suddenly a phone call, and then the deal was announced, or the pause in that case. So maybe we'll be able to get rid of the black background because we won't be in mourning anymore tomorrow.
Yeah, Trudeau. Trump only decides when he talks. Trudeau is just on the phone with the "call me maybe." There you go. That's my joke for the day. Anyway, we'll let you go.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors.